"You're not my granddaughter, so I forgot to put your name in the will," my grandpa announced at his birthday party. The room erupted in laughter except for me. I walked up, quietly placed my gift on the table, just a single sheet of paper. Then I ripped it to pieces right in front of him. When he managed to piece it back together, his face turned white. If you had seen me walk into my grandfather's 80th birthday party that night, you might have thought I was just another guest, quiet, unnoticed, blending into the laughter around me. But I wasn't. I was the granddaughter no one wanted to claim. The clinking of glasses stopped when my grandpa, Walter Carter, raised his voice for a toast. His words cut deeper than any knife. "You're not my granddaughter, so I forgot to put your name in the will." The crowd erupted in laughter, some shaking their heads, others smirking like it was the best joke of the evening. Everyone laughed except me. I stood up, walked slowly toward the table, and placed my gift in front of him. Just one sheet of paper. No ribbon, no wrapping. Then I ripped it in half and again and again. His grin faded until his face turned white. I wasn't always the outsider. For a long time, I truly believed I was part of the Carter family. My mom, Laura, raised me on her own after my dad left before I was even born. She worked double shifts at the diner, her hands always smelling faintly of coffee and fryer grease, but she made sure I never felt unloved. Whenever I asked about my place in the family, she would smile tiredly and say, "Blood doesn't make you family, Madison. Love does." Every Sunday, she would drive me out to my grandparents' house in Sacramento. The Carter residence was everything. Our small apartment wasn't grand. Manicured lawns, walls lined with family portraits. At first, Grandpa Walter would pat my head and hand me a sugar cookie from a glass jar. Grandma Helen would say, "Be polite, Madison, say thank you." I thought it was warmth, even if it was a little stiff. When I was 6, they threw a backyard barbecue for all the cousins. I still remember clutching my paper plate, lined up for hot dogs, while my cousins bragged about the ponies they rode at summer camp. I didn't have ponies or camp stories, but I did have the determination to fit in. I showed Grandpa the picture I drew of our apartment building surrounded by flowers. He barely glanced at it before setting it down on the picnic table. My cousin Tyler, on the other hand, handed him a macaroni necklace, and Grandpa laughed like it was priceless. Still, I told myself not to care. He was old-fashioned, I reasoned. I even joined the debate club, thinking maybe he'd be proud if I won, but there were cracks I couldn't ignore. At Thanksgiving when I was 8, I overheard him mutter to my uncle, "She's not real Carter blood." I pretended I didn't hear it, but the words sat heavy in my chest. From then on, small things started to sting more. In the Christmas photo, I was placed on the edge, nearly cropped out of the frame. At my cousin's birthday party, my name was left off the cake and no one corrected it. Whenever I raised my hand, eager to share my achievements, perfect spelling tests, art contest ribbons, someone would brush past me to clap for a cousin's soccer goal or new braces. I tried not to let it break me. I kept repeating my mother's mantra. Love makes a family. But late at night, lying in my narrow bed, I couldn't shake the gnawing question. What if love wasn't enough for the Carters? That doubt planted in childhood would one day grow into the determination that led me to the moment at his birthday party. The moment when silence and shame turned into strength. The words, "She's not real. Carter blood didn't leave me." They echoed in the back of my mind like a bell I couldn't unhear. At first, I told myself I had misheard him, that maybe it was a slip or a joke adults made when they thought kids weren't listening. But as the years passed, the truth became harder to deny. I started noticing the little signs that had always been there. My name was often missing from family invitations. A cousin's wedding invitation would arrive with every grandchild listed except me. At first, my mom would call to check maybe it was an accident. The answers were always vague. "Oh, we must have overlooked her," or "we assumed Madison was busy." But the pattern repeated so often it stopped feeling like an accident and started feeling like the rule. At family gatherings, I became the shadow on the wall. My cousins filled the living room with laughter, comparing colleges, cars, and summer trips abroad. When I tried to join in, the circle always seemed to close just a little tighter, leaving me outside. Grandpa Walter encouraged it in ways that were subtle but cutting. When I shared that I had won my school's art fair, he waved me off with, "Art doesn't pay the bills." But when my cousin Tyler bragged about his business internship, Even though he barely lasted 2 weeks, Grandpa nodded approvingly, calling him a true Carter. I began keeping a notebook, writing down each moment as if recording evidence. It wasn't bitterness at first. It was survival. I needed proof, even for myself, that I wasn't imagining it. July 4th, Grandpa introduced everyone by name except me. Christmas Eve, Grandma handed out stockings. Mine was forgotten. New Year's toast. Grandpa raised his glass to my grandchildren and counted them out loud, stopping just before me. The sharpest cut came at a summer barbecue when I was 15. I had saved up to buy a necklace for Grandma Helen's birthday, delicate silver, with a small emerald, her birthstone. I handed it to her, proud of the sacrifice I had made. She smiled politely, thanked me, and set it aside. Moments later, my cousin handed her a homemade card with glitter glue. Grandpa laughed, clapped him on the shoulder, and called him thoughtful. I wanted to vanish. I wanted to run. Instead, I stood there smiling as if it didn't matter. Though inside, I was breaking. From that day on, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. I wasn't just being overlooked. I was being erased. And eraser hurts more than rejection because it makes you question if you ever existed to them in the first place. That night, I wrote one final entry in my notebook. I will never beg them to see me again. One day, they'll regret not looking. On my 18th birthday, there was no celebration, no cake, no candles, no family gathering, just silence, as if the day didn't matter. Grandpa Walter had thrown a lavish party for my cousin Tyler's 18th a month earlier. Complete with speeches, champagne toasts, and a new car parked in the driveway with a bow on top. For me, there was only a plain breakfast at home, and the sound of my mother's weary sigh as she left for work. That morning, I made a choice. I packed my life into 2 duffel bags, textbooks, thrift store clothes, a worn sketchbook filled with designs I had been drawing for years. At the bottom, I placed a floor plan I'd sketched late at night, the outline of a home I swore I would build someday. It wasn't just a house. It was a promise. A promise to myself that I would create something lasting, something no one could take away. I boarded a Greyhound bus bound for San Diego with exactly $450 in my wallet and a scholarship acceptance letter tucked safely in my backpack. I didn't know anyone there. I didn't have a safety net. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. Freedom has a way of making even uncertainty feel like oxygen. The first year nearly broke me. My scholarship covered tuition, but not food or rent. I rented a tiny garage apartment with peeling paint and a window cracked down the middle patched with duct tape. Winters were freezing, summers suffocating. At night, I worked the front desk of a 24-hour gym, scanning membership cards with half-closed eyes. On weekends, I tutored high school kids in math just to keep the lights on. Dinner was usually a pack of instant noodles or whatever leftovers a kind barista slipped me at closing time. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered my grandfather's words. She's not real Carter blood. I let those words burn, and then I turned the fire into fuel. Each exam I aced, each project I completed, each design I sketched became a silent rebuttal to the man who had erased me. By my sophomore year, professors began to notice me. One pulled me aside after class and said, "You don't just design buildings, Madison. You design hope." That sentence carried me through nights when I doubted myself. I didn't call home, I didn't send updates, and no one from the Carter family reached out. It was as if I had vanished, but I didn't vanish. I was reinventing myself. Standing alone was Betrayal, but it taught me the most important lesson of my life. Family might turn its back on you, but strength can be built brick by brick, even from the rubble of rejection. And I was determined to build something so unshakable that one day when they finally looked my way, they would regret ever doubting I belonged. By the time I turned 21, exhaustion had become my second skin. My days were a blur of classes, work shifts, and endless design sketches scattered across my tiny apartment. Yet somewhere in that chaos, my dream began to take shape. One professor, Dr. Alvarez, saw something in me. He was an expert in sustainable architecture, a field I had fallen in love with. Instead of steel and glass monuments that screamed wealth and ego, sustainable design was about creating structures that belonged to the land, to the people who lived in them. After class one evening, he stopped me at the door. "You don't just see buildings, Madison," he said. "You see futures. With his recommendation, I landed a paid internship at a small eco-design firm. It wasn't glamorous. The office was cramped and the coffee machine rattled like it was on its last breath, but it was mine. For the first time, my name appeared on blueprints. For the first time, I could sign off on ideas that mattered. The turning point came with a woman named Trina Delgado. She was a single mother raising 2 kids after inheriting a rundown lot from her father. Every other architect had quoted her prices she couldn't afford. She came to our firm, desperate, exhausted, and on the verge of giving up. The senior partners brushed her off too much work for too little money, but I couldn't let it go. I asked if she'd let me try. With Dr. Alvarez's quiet encouragement, I stayed up night after night sketching a plan that was both affordable and resilient. Reclaimed wood, passive cooling, and rooftop solar panels that cut her future bills in half. When I showed Trina the design, her eyes welled with tears. "No one else even listened," she whispered. "You didn't just draw a house, you drew a home." Construction took 6 months. I was on site almost every day, wearing a hard hat 2 sizes too big, hauling boards, checking details. When the final nail was hammered in, the sun lit up the small house like it had been waiting just for her. A local reporter happened to stop by. The headline in the Sunday paper read, "Sustainable Sanctuary, a Single Mom's New Beginning." My name wasn't front and center, but it was there, printed in black and white. For the first time, my work was public. Calls started trickling in nonprofits, small families, even a local council member asking if we could discuss affordable eco-housing. Within a year, I was offered a junior lead role on a community duplex project in Chula Vista. It wasn't big, it wasn't flashy, but it had my fingerprints on every brick. My name on the permit. That duplex gave me something my family never had. Proof that I mattered, that I could leave a mark on the world without a Carter last name stamped on it. By 23, I was ready to take a leap I'd once only dreamed of. I poured my savings into registering my own company, Vidian Build. At first, it was just me, an old laptop, and a website I coded from scratch. Clients didn't exactly line up. There were nights I cried over unpaid bills, nights I stared at an empty inbox. But then I'd look at Trina's house framed on my wall, and I'd remember, start small but build strong. Vidian wasn't about ego, it was about belonging. And though I didn't realize it at the time, that belief would become the very weapon I carried back into my grandfather's world, the world that had once erased me. Success has a way of changing the way you see the past. By the time Vidian Build had survived its first 2 shaky years, I was no longer the girl who ate instant noodles in a cracked window garage. I had an office near Balboa Park, a small team of 5, and contracts trickling in from nonprofits and eco-minded developers. For the first time, stability felt possible. But with stability came reflection. I would walk into our office each morning, passing by framed photos of our projects, duplexes bathed in sunlight, renovated schools, buzzing with children, community gardens blooming between reclaimed walls. And every time a shadow of memory followed me, my grandfather's voice, low and steady, echoing from my childhood. "Owning land, Madison, that's what makes people respect you." Enter V, he probably forgot he ever said it. I never did. It had been the one piece of advice he'd given me, tossed out casually when I was 10 years old. At the time, I'd been sitting on the porch sulking after being picked last for kickball. He barely looked up from his gardening, just muttered it like a fact of life. Land equals respect. Those words became the compass I didn't know I was following. So when I signed my first big contract with a city council project, I made a decision. Instead of celebrating with a car or a vacation, I began searching for land. Not just any plot, but something beautiful, undeniable, symbolic. After months of searching, I found it. 20 acres near Lake Tahoe. The land was pristine, bordered by redwoods with a sweeping view of the water and mountains. It was quiet, almost sacred. The asking price, $3.2 million. I didn't blink. I signed the papers. Most people would have called it reckless. But to me, it was strategy. I wasn't just buying land. I was buying a story, a weapon, a truth. My plan was simple. I would gift the property to my grandfather. Deed signed over in his name, presented on the night of his 80th birthday. It wasn't revenge. Not exactly. It was a mirror. A way to show him that the granddaughter he had erased had built something he valued more than blood. I worked with my lawyer to prepare the paperwork. A single sheet of thick cream-colored paper embossed in gold with the words Grant of Property Transfer, Parcel 4812, Lake Tahoe County. At the bottom, my signature, steady and unapologetic. I placed it inside a leather folder, smooth and weighty, and had his name pressed on the front in gold. Walter Carter. Every detail mattered. This wasn't about begging for recognition. It was about showing him what he had thrown away. In the weeks leading up to the party, I rehearsed what I might say. Happy birthday, Grandpa. I wanted to give you something meaningful. No hard feelings, just closure. Or maybe you once told me land was respect. I want you to see that I listened. But each time I practiced, the words felt less important. The gift itself said everything. The act of giving it and taking it away would be the real speech. Still at night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of my apartment. Doubts whispered in the dark. What if he didn't care? What if he laughed it off? What if tearing that deed apart in front of 100 guests didn't sting the way I hoped? Then I remembered all the birthdays with no cake, the stockings left empty, the photographs where I was cropped out. I remembered the sting of being erased over and over until I questioned if I ever existed in his eyes. And I told myself, this isn't about his reaction. It's about mine, about walking into that party, uninvited but undeniable, and proving that I had built a life no Carter could deny. The land was his on paper, but the power that was mine. The night of my grandfather's 80th birthday arrived with the weight of inevitability. I woke before dawn, nerves buzzing like static beneath my skin. In the silence of my apartment, I ironed my navy blue suit. The same one I had worn when signing Vidian's first city contract. It wasn't flashy, but it grounded me. I tucked the leather folder into my bag, the deed pressed flat inside. My grandfather's name embossed in gold. My hands didn't shake, but my heart thundered like a drum in my chest. The drive from San Diego to Sacramento took over 8 hours. I didn't play music. I let silence ride shotgun, rehearsing lines in my head, discarding them, rehearsing again. By the time I pulled up in front of the Carter residence, twilight had settled, string lights twinkling over the manicured lawn. The white fence was exactly as I remembered it. So were the daisy bushes my grandmother used to trim. Guests in evening gowns and sharp suits filled the backyard, champagne glasses in hand. A jazz trio played under the pergola, laughter rolling through the warm summer air. For a moment, I stood at the gate, clutching the folder, just breathing. I reminded myself, you are not here to beg, you are here to show them. When I stepped through the gate, no one noticed at first. I slipped past groups of cousins and neighbors, my heels clicking softly against the stone path. Then a voice cut through the crowd. Well, well, came the draw. I turned. It was Tyler, my golden boy cousin, holding a glass of whiskey, his blazer tailored within an inch of perfection. His smirk spread slow and venomous. If it isn't the family charity case, a few people chuckled. Heat flushed my cheeks, but I kept walking. You take a wrong turn, Madison, Tyler called after me, or just here to make a scene. I didn't answer. The folder felt heavy under my arm, almost humming. At the head table, my grandfather stood with a microphone in one hand and a glass of wine in the other. His silver hair gleamed under the lights, his smile practiced charming. Beside him, Grandma Helen wore her pale green dress, nodding graciously to each guest. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice booming. Before we cut the cake, I have something important to share. The crowd hushed. I froze mid-step. His eyes found mine, cold and calculating, before sliding past me as if I were a stranger. I want to make it official tonight. He said to my grandson Tyler, I leave the house, the accounts, the land. To my other grandchildren, generous gifts. But as for Madison, his lips curled. She's not truly my granddaughter, so I forgot to put her name in the will. Laughter erupted. Glasses clinkedded. Someone muttered, Betrayal. Even Grandma chuckled softly, her eyes sliding away from mine. The air thickened. My pulse roared in my ears. I walked forward, steady, deliberate, no tears, no outburst. I reached the table, set the leather folder down gently beside the birthday cake, and unfastened the clasp. The room stilled, curiosity rippling through the crowd. Tyler sneered. What's this, one of your DIY projects? I ignored him. I lifted the single sheet of paper high, the gold-embossed title glinting under the lights. Grant of Property Transfer, Parcel 4812, Lake Tahoe County. This, I said, my voice cutting clean across the lawn, was a gift. 20 acres of prime land on Lake Tahoe, valued at $3.2 million. A murmur rippled through the crowd. My grandfather's smile faltered. It could have been yours, I continued, meeting his eyes. It was yours, or at least it was. And then, before anyone could move, I tore the paper in half. Gasps filled the air. I tore it again and again, until the deed fluttered from my hands in jagged pieces, scattering across the white tablecloth, over the cake, over the wine glasses. Silence fell like a hammer. Tyler's smirk vanished. Grandma's hand trembled as she reached blindly for her glass. Guests stared witty-eyed, whispers sparking like wildfire. Did she say 3 million? Was that real? But my grandfather, he didn't move. His face was pale, his lips slightly parted, his hands clenched white at his sides. For once, the mask slipped. For once, he looked human, maybe even afraid. I held his gaze. I didn't come here to beg, I said, my voice calm but fierce. I came to show you what I built without you and what you'll never have because you chose to erase me. I turned. The crowd parted, hushed, watching me walk toward the gate. No applause, no confrontation, just the stunned silence of people who had seen the unthinkable. As I crossed the yard, I heard a whisper from somewhere in the crowd. She just tore up $3 million. Another voice softer. Why would he do that to her? I didn't look back. The music faltered, then stumbled back into rhythm, hollow and off-key. Behind me, in the wreckage of cake and candle wax, lay the shredded remains of a gift that had become a weapon. And for the first time in my life, it wasn't me who was erased. It was him. I thought the story ended the moment I stepped out of the Carter backyard. The string lights behind me glowed dimmer as I walked away, my heels clicking against the pavement, my heart pounding with an odd mix of relief and grief. I drove back to San Diego in silence, convinced that what I'd done was final closure. But 3 days later, an unfamiliar number appeared on my phone. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened, a woman's voice said, "Madison, you don't know me, but my name is Erica. I was at your grandfather's party. I think you should know what happened after you left." Curiosity burned. I called her back. Erica was a junior partner at the bank where my grandfather had worked. She'd only met me once years ago, but she remembered. "After you walked out," she said. No one spoke. The whole yard froze like you'd pulled the floor out from under them. And then her voice dropped. Your grandfather bent down. He started picking up the pieces. I gripped the phone tighter. "What do you mean?" "I mean, he got on his knees." Madison, in front of everyone. He gathered each shred of that deed like he thought he could put it back together. People were stunned. "Mr. Qley, you remember, his old board member." He finally spoke up. "He told your grandfather he was a fool. Said, 'That woman you humiliated built something you couldn't even dream of. She's worth more than everything in your will.'" My chest ocked. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Erica continued. "Some guests left in disgust. Others whispered to your grandmother, but she just kept repeating, 'We didn't know.' Your cousin tried to laugh it off, called you a drama queen. Said you probably forged the paper, but no one laughed with him. Not this time. That night I couldn't sleep. My phone buzzed again. A text, this time from Aunt Carol, my grandfather's sister. She hadn't spoken to me since I was 15. Her message was simple. He's been in his study for hours. The torn deed is on his desk. He won't speak to anyone. I didn't reply. Days blurred into weeks. Then one morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. Real paper, handwritten, no return address. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Madison," it began, "I don't know how to start this. And maybe that's fitting since I never knew how to start with you. I failed you. I failed to protect the bond we had when you were little. I failed to see what you were becoming. And on my birthday, I failed in front of everyone. I picked up the pieces of what you gave me. Not just the paper, but the truth. I don't know how to make this right, but I want you to know I'm sorry, Walter. No, Grandpa, or maybe just a man who should have been better." I held the letter for a long time. My eyes skimmed the words again and again, but no tears came. No relief either, just silence. I folded it carefully, slid it into the back of a manila folder where I kept my earliest sketches. It didn't belong in my present. It belonged with the younger version of me who had once waited, prayed, begged for recognition. That girl had needed his apology, but I wasn't her anymore. I wasn't waiting anymore. A month after I tucked my grandfather's letter into the back of that folder, I stood in front of my team at Vidian Build and said 6 words that changed everything. We're building in Lake Tahoe. At first, they looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Land that expensive, a project that ambitious, but I wasn't asking for approval. I was stating a truth. The 20 acres I had once bought as a gift, then weaponized as a statement, were still mine, and I knew what they were meant for now. We drew up plans for a community center, something alive with possibility. Solar-powered classrooms, shared gardens, open workspaces, and walls painted by the very people who would use them. A place not for legacy by blood, but for legacy by choice. It took a year of sleepless nights, city permits, and endless fundraising. But the day we cut the ribbon, the haven stood tall on the slope above Lake Tahoe. Wide glass walls reflected the mountains. Cedar trees whispered over murals painted by teenagers who had aged out of foster care. Mothers carried toddlers through sunlit courtyards. Volunteers taught workshops beneath the open sky. One afternoon, a girl named Ella approached me. 16, with weary eyes and a stubborn jaw, she asked, "You really built this?" I nodded. "Even without a family?" She pressed. I smiled, especially without a family. For a moment, her eyes softened. Then she hugged me, wordless but certain. That hug meant more than any inheritance, more than any last name carved into marble. I never replied to my grandfather's letter. I never visited his study or called his phone. But sometimes when the wind swept across the haven, carrying the sound of children laughing or tools clanging, I imagined him standing there at a distance watching, wondering what could have been if he'd chosen differently. Maybe he regretted it. Maybe he didn't. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I no longer needed his recognition to prove I belonged. I had built something greater than his will, greater than his name. I had built a legacy that would outlast us both.